Alright guys, another day, another strength, and today we got another Mind Over Muscles episode talking about the deadlift, right down to these last two main lifts. I'm joined by my assistant over here, the other one's on this side, don't know if you can see her or not. But yeah, we're going to talk about why we should deadlift first, right? So the deadlift is a natural human movement pattern, just like the other ones we've been talking about. This one is picking something up off the floor, and it turns out that it trains the most muscle of any of these main lifts. Right, you're using tons of muscles in the deadlift. I'm sure you've heard that before, that even your eyelids are contracted during a deadlift, and it uses the most weight of any of these lifts. That trains that much muscle mass as well, right? So like the press, the Chad factor is very high with deadlifting. If you look up all these, there's plenty of strongman competitions that are pretty cool, that have dudes deadlifting weird objects like cars and trucks and stuff like that, and like weirdly shaped stones, and it's very cool, right? So the Chad factor, the cool factor, is pretty high with deadlifting. There's something really cool about just ripping a heavy barbell off the floor and standing all the way up with it. So anyways, let's get into the muscles of this movement, right? We got the prime movers, which are basically all the big muscles of the hips and knees. So we have the hamstrings and the glutes primarily. That's your hip extension right there. You got the quads, right, which crosses the knee joint. There is a little bit of knee extension in the deadlift, so your quads do get worked. Then you have the adductors, the inner thigh. There's a little bit of that going on, right, to a small degree. And then also to a small degree, we have the calves, which are extending at the ankle, right? So we got that going on. And then as far as the postural muscles, quite a few, right? This is probably what the deadlift is more known for when you think of the actual muscles of the deadlift. You have the spinal erectors, the abs, you have the traps and the lats of the upper back, right? So you're getting a ton of tension, ton of stress there. Also the rotator cuff, right, because the four muscles of the rotator cuff, they basically just hold the arm in the socket. Those are getting worked pretty good. Mark Ripito has an article about rehabbing his shoulder with rack pulls after he had rotator cuff surgery, and he was able to do those like a week after surgery without pain, and helped get them stronger. And then my assistant here is blocking the last couple, but we have the forearms and the neck, which are both being used isometrically. And there's more beyond that too, but those are like the big ones people think of, right? And then one note I will make about the forearms is that if you're deadlifting heavy, you should be using an alternate type of grip. So we got three different primary types. There are the hook grip, which is you wrap your fingers over your thumb. Downside to that one is that it hurts a lot. You have the mixed grip, which is you have one hand pronated over like this, one hand supinated under like that. And what that does is it keeps the bar from rolling out of both hands, because in a double overhand grip, the bar is just going to roll out of your fingers. So as it's rolling out of one hand, it's rolling into the other, so it keeps it nice and stable. The downside to that grip is that it's asymmetrical. And then also, if you're going to do that, don't alternate your hands all the time. Just do the same one all the time so you can practice it. And then the last one is straps. So you just wrap straps around the bar. Same thing as double overhand. The downside to that one is that you have to have straps handy. And then it also takes a second to kind of set them up and get into the lift. But yeah, so all those lifts, or all those different grips, have their uses and have their benefits and drawbacks. So just pick one and stick to it, really. And then use it for any heavy work sets, because you don't want your forearms to be limiting your deadlift strength and abilities. But yeah, so onto the technique, right? A couple big ones here. The main thing is that we're looking to keep the bar over midfoot. That's the main error that I see, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, bar over midfoot, because the bar has to move in a straight vertical line in the deadlift. You don't want to go in diagonally. You don't want to like looping around all over the place, right? You have to set your back in the deadlift. That's very important, right? So your back has to go from, flex like this to extended, and has to stay that way on the way up in order to transfer force efficiently from your prime movers into your hands. The deadlift also allows for the most amount of quote-unquote slop, I would say, in the technique, right? So you can get away with a lot of errors in the deadlift and still have a pretty strong deadlift, which you'll see a lot. There are also, if you're a pretty technically efficient and advanced lifter, there are ways that you can finagle the deadlift setup, things like moving your feet very, very close together in a conventional deadlift, for example. There's the sumo deadlift, which we're not going to talk about in this video because that's not really the same type of deadlift. It kind of trains things differently. But there's the foot stance, so bringing the feet super close together, pointing the toes out, which kind of accomplishes almost the same thing as a sumo deadlift, but not quite. And then there's also, you can finagle the upper back position, so you can have an extended lower back, lumbar spine, and a flexed upper back or thoracic spine, which actually kind of accomplishes the same thing, brings your hips closer to the bar, makes the lift a little bit easier. Trade-off is at the top, you have to like uncurl your back and stand up so it can make the lockout stick a little bit. But yeah, there are a lot of muscles being used, a lot going on in deadlift. But yeah, so let's talk about common errors in the deadlift. Number one is the hip height / balance, right? So at the start of the lift, the most common thing you'll see is people will drop their hips down, send their knees forward, and what that does is it bumps the bar in front of midfoot, right? So with hip height, that's one thing, right? So your knees are too far forward, the bar's in front of midfoot. Another error is sometimes people will have the bar over midfoot and they'll have their knees like not touching the bar. So that means that their hips and knees are already extended a little bit, which means they have less force. They have a less advantageous position to produce force. There's less that they can actually produce because they've already extended their joints a little bit, right? So that's going to make it harder on the way up. And so I see people kind of like getting the wrong idea about the deadlift online. If your shins are not touching the bar, then you're not in the right position at the start unless you're doing a stiff leg deadlift. But if the bar is over midfoot, then your shins are gonna be touching the bar. I've seen like a Pete Rubish video, I want to say. I don't want to name names and call people out and stuff. The guy's a very strong lifter and all, but he made like some video where he was critiquing the starting strength deadlift, and then he talked about having the bar off of your shins to reduce friction. I can make a whole other video on that, but like it was kind of misguided, right? The idea is you want the bar over midfoot, your shins are gonna be touching the bar. It's as simple as that, right? And then as far as the balance goes, so that is directly related to the balance, but also on the way up during the lift, a common error is lifting the chest early, like trying to stand up before extending the legs, right? So you want to focus on extending the legs on the way up. That's going to keep the bar moving in a straight line. If you try to pull your chest up, you're going to pull the bar around your knees, and it's going to go like that in like a like a little half triangle kind of shape, which is going to make it a lot harder. But yeah, number 2 for the errors is back extension, right? Not setting the back all the way. It just makes it inefficient in the sense that you're not transferring force as well as you could be from your hips and knees into the bar. And then also as you get towards the lockout, you have to uncurl your spine, so you wind up with like the hitch. So if you see like, those really ugly deadlifts where someone's got a cat back and then they get it halfway up the thighs and then their knees come way forward because they got to hitch the bar up and they're, closing their eyes and looking all over the place. So it's going to make a very ugly lift, very difficult. And then the last thing is yanking on the barbell, not, pulling the slack out of the bar. So the most famous example of this is like Dr. Deadlift, Kyler Willem, I forget how to say his name. Very, very, very strong dude, right? But he yanks the bar off the floor. He's now torn his lat like 7 times or something crazy like that, right? And it's, it's pretty much directly related to that. So you don't want to yank the bar off the floor. You want to pull the slack out and then push with your legs. I like to say the deadlift is like a Chinese finger trap, where like the more dynamic you try to make it and the more you try to like horse the weight off the floor, the harder it's going to be, right? You just have to kind of like settle into it, get as tight as you can. It's going to suck no matter what you do, so just let it suck, deal with it, and get through the lift. So anyways, let's talk about variations that work pretty well for the deadlift. My number 1, my favorite, is any kind of modified range of motion. So my favorites are extended range of motion, like the deficit deadlift and the snatch grip deadlift. But for certain individuals, the halting deadlift and the rack pull work very well as well. So those are both overload movements, both heavier than your normal deadlift, whereas the deficit and snatch grip are underload. So any of those is going to work for different reasons, right? The halting and the rack pull can work great if you are a very strong lifter and you just need to segment the lift into its different halves so you can recover a little bit better. And it can also work for the same reasons for a less strong lifter, because then you're able to load the weight super maximally, right? So more than you would for your deadlift. So if you're stuck deadlifting like 285 or 290 or something like that, then you run your rack pull up to 315 and your halting deadlift up to 300, then your deadlift isn't going to feel quite as heavy, and that's going to help. And then by the same token, the deficit and the snatch grip deadlift makes the deadlift feel easier because you're used to pulling from a few extra inches basically, and then you get used to that, and then you go back to the deadlift and it feels like a rack pull basically, if you get good at those. Number 2, we have the RDL and the good morning. I like the RDLs more. They're not the same lift, but they're very, very similar. Like the RDL is going to involve a lot more of the upper back muscular isometrically. The good morning is going to do the same thing too, kind of like a squat would, but the RDL gives you that nice weighted stretch. You get more of the actual weight in your upper back muscles, your traps and your lats and everything, having to keep the bar close to you as well. But yeah, great movements. Those are great for just building up the posterior chain and the muscles involved, and they're also beneficial because the deadlift is very, very heavy and very stressful. So in terms of like frequency, you're probably not going to be deadlifting more than once a week. And then as you get more advanced, it might be even less than once a week, and you can intersperse RDLs and good mornings to allow you to recover better but still get in some pulling volume in between. And then number 3 is the squat. We have mentioned that squats and deadlifts are very similar. In the squat video, deadlifts were on that list as well for useful variations. So the squats are going to be beneficial for the deadlift. They have a longer range of motion, same muscles, basically just taking the joints through a long range of motion. And then number 4, we have any kind of bodybuilding work. relating to primarily the legs, the back, and the abs. So like anything like quads and hamstrings. You know, you can do like leg machines and stuff like that. There's really, like I always say, there's no downside to doing those lifts aside from the time that it takes. And then if you just kind of like giant set them all together, it doesn't take very long at all. It's pretty easy to recover from, and then you're going to get a small benefit in terms of, you know, building up the muscles that aid in that lift, and it can be kind of fun to do. So your legs, right, quads, glutes, hamstrings, any kind of that sort of isolation stuff, any sort of back, as far as like rows, pull-ups, chin-ups, those are great. And then even smaller movements like, lat prayers, like the straight arm pull down kind of deal, pullovers with like a dumbbell, something like that can help. There's really like a wide variety of lifts you can do, anything for the abs as well. And so the deadlift, like I said before, uses a ton of muscle mass, and it's really not that technical, not that difficult to do. So in general, the more muscle you have and the bigger you are, which is true of any lift, but it correlates pretty directly with the deadlift, meaning that, you know, with the press, you have to practice the press a lot, so you have to kind of like get bigger and then practice the press and build it up. With the deadlift, you don't have to practice that much. You can just kind of like get bigger, not even deadlift for a while, and then just go back into deadlifting and immediately be stronger. And you see this a lot with people that will replace the deadlift with purely like RDLs, for example, and then they go back to deadlifting, and then they still have a super strong deadlift. Same thing with, you know, you can like just squat for a while and just do like pull-ups and chin-ups and good mornings, and then you know, go back to deadlifting and you haven't lost any strength. So big muscle, big deadlift. That's basically the long and short of it. And then as far as the programming and progression goes for this lift, it's very similar to the other ones, right? 1 to 5 reps for skill/practice. One thing I found that works very well with the deadlift is, as far as like volume work for pulls from the floor, doing your volume work in the 1 to 5 rep range works very well, especially in the lower like 1 to 3 rep range, if you do them as a lighter percentage of your 1 rep max. So basically like cat sets or dynamic effort. If you're doing something like 75 to 80%, instead of doing 2 sets of 5 at like 80 to 85%, you could do 5 sets of 2 at like 70 to 75%. And that tends to carry over very well to the deadlift, you know, because you're practicing it with good form. You're not beating the heck out of yourself because it's very stressful. You gotta be careful with that. But yeah, 5 to 10 reps, that tends to work great for the supplemental barbell lifts. So like the RDLs, the good mornings, any kind of squat variation that you're using for the deadlift. So like any kind of like SSB squat or front squat, high bar squat. You can even do it with a low bar squat or like a pause squat or something. And then 10 plus reps for these smaller movements, the supplemental muscular work, you know, like your leg curls, leg extensions, your ab work, your upper back, pull-ups, chins, rows. I would keep in, you know, lower rep ranges. I've talked about that before, and I'll talk about that more later in the series as well. Those will probably get their own video. But yeah, that's basically it for the programming. Add sets as you need them, right? Generally, the deadlift responds very well to low volume, especially when it's heavier. So I would recommend starting with like 1 set. You know, the starting strength progression is 1 set of 5 to start out with. That tends to work great for a very, very long time. You generally don't need much more than that. So 1 to 2 sets for most people, maybe 3 here and there. And then, you know, try to keep your super, super high-end, top-end strength work few and far between, right? Like I said before, you can do a lot of these, you know, RDL and good mornings. You can do a lot of the, you know, bodybuilding work to build up your deadlift, and you don't need to be going super heavy all the time because it's going to beat you up a lot. And this is for, you know, advanced lifters, of course. But yeah, prioritize adding weight for your strength work. Prioritize accumulating reps and sets for your more muscular work, right? It's kind of a spectrum, so, you know, you can kind of do both with both, and you have to eventually. But yeah, that's really it for the deadlift. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Say something in the comments. The next video in the series will be the bench press, and then we'll be on to more of the actual, you know, practical examples of the programming, some of the more smaller lifts, right, to train the different muscles involved in these main lifts. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. All right, goodbye.